Welcome back everyone to another video, and today we shall work on our UI. Some of you have mentioned to me that this UI looks just terrible, and I fully agree with you. So today we shall do something about it so that it looks way nicer. So our task is to go from something like this to something like this. So first things first, let me explain some of the things how we can actually customize our UI. So one thing to keep in mind of is that our main widget is our UI inventory, which contains all of our smaller widgets like our equipment panels, backpack panels, the other way around. So this is the backpack, this is the equipment, our Dropbox, our player slots, and so forth. And they basically have two background colors. One of them is right here in our UI widget, which can be changed by going to the appearance, selecting the border first, and going to the appearance and changing the tint of it. So let's just simply make it red. And the other color would be in our actual panel. In this case, it's going to be our inventory panel, which has a white background. So if we would again go to the appearance and change the tint, let's change this to be green for now. You can see that now if we press I, it has a green background with a red border. Let's say perhaps we don't need a border. So to remove the border, that means that in our UI inventory, you want to select the tint to have 0 on the alpha channel, so no opacity whatsoever, so that the background would be transparent. And this way now we are removing our border. So what I'm gonna do first as of right now is simply move these across the entire screen to make sure that they fit their desired locations. And since that is pretty simple, all I'm gonna do is just simply skip this part. What I want to mention is that I will make sure to change the anchors. So from this one was on the right side, it was anchored to the right side. Now it's gonna be on the left side, so I'm gonna anchor this to the left side. What I also want to do is make my inventory backpack panel a little wider, and also I want to up my slots per row. So I will go to my inventory panel, and in the graph I will change this slots per row variable from 3 to have 4 widgets per row. Actually pick up a backpack, you can see we have 4 icons in a row. And also what I want to do is make sure that these player slots right here are also set to have 4 per row. So let me change the sizing real quick. And what I simply want to do now is select my player slots and move them in the other horizontal box, because as of right now we have 2 horizontal boxes that contain 2 slots each. So I will select all of these, move these up over here, copy the spacer so that I have a spacer in between every single slot, and then delete this bottom spacer and delete the other horizontal box. So now I have 4 player slots in a row. So now the widgets have been plus minus aligned the way we want them to. And one question that I received was, can we make our Dropbox bigger? And yes, of course we can. We can make it into a full screen one, and it can be as big as we want. One thing that we got to keep in mind, as of right now, you can see that this panel right here is on top of our Dropbox, but our backpack is not. What we want to do is simply move our Dropbox to be at the very top of the hierarchy. That means that all the other panels will be created on top of this, and I will make this full screen. So I will select anchor this to the full screen, type zeros in all of these values right here, and this is gonna make our Dropbox full screen. So now let's just test it. So let's pick up an item, for instance, press I. If we take our item, drop it on top of the Dropbox, you can see it got dropped on the ground. And since I don't want my Dropbox to be gray nor black, what I want to do is change the tint to have 0 on the alpha on this one, and then I will go to my UI Dropbox. I will actually delete the text, select the border, and simply move down on the opacity to, let's say, like 0.5 or even perhaps 0.3. So now that we have done that, you can see if we press I, it does get a little bit darker, but not a lot. And I think this will fit just fine for me. So now what I want to do is change up the background colors, just like in the preview image I have over here. So I will go to my inventory panel first, select the border, go to the tint, and the background color is black over there, but the opacity is 0.3. So that's what I'm going to change all of the backgrounds to. I'm going to go also to my equipment panel, select the border, and change the tint again to be black and 0.3. Now for our player slots, this is a little different because we are changing the background inside of our UI inventory. Since we don't actually have a player slots widget, the thing gets created over here. So again, the tint is going to be black and it's going to be 0.3. So now if we would take a look at this, press I, there we go, this is our background. Now the next thing that I want to work on is our icons. So let me begin with the player slots icons first. So let's open these up, and by default what we want to have is again a black color. So the tint on this is 0.4 on the alpha. So we can compile and save this, and now let's go to our graph, because in our get background image we want to do some changing over here. As of right now, we only set the icon to be the icon that we want it to be. We could change the empty items icon, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is do a if branch check before we make this brush, and I'm going to check if the name is equal to our empty item, and if it's not, then we shall print our image. But if it is, what I want to do is copy these last two nodes, connect the execution to true, and here I want to make the slate brush for our tint and change the color up. So this is going to be black and 0.4. So now if we would take a look at this, you can see that our icons are slightly darker than the background. Now the next step would be for us to create this blue frame that we have in this preview of image. Now, so that I wouldn't mess up my brush binding that I have for the background, what I will do is simply right click on the border, and I'm going to wrap it with another border like so. Now let's see, so this is giving us a white color with some padding. So let's make the padding, let's say let's give it like a 5 or perhaps even a 10. There we go. Let's give it a tint, and I already know my values, so I'm gonna simply type in the hex linear code like so. It is giving me the color. Press play, press I. Yeah, it's not exactly what we want. The padding is also a little bit too big, so let's actually give this a padding of, let's say, 3 pixels. And also in our graph, I guess this value right here being 0.4 is not going to work for us, so let's bump it up to 1 so that it is actually black the way we want it to. So now this looks a little closer to what we desire. Now the next thing what I probably want to do is go back to my UI inventory, and let's see over here, probably I want to give this some more padding again, so let's give this like a 5, and probably maybe boost this up a little bit, a few units. So let's make it like 140 to have it minus 740. And I want to add, we have a vertical box, so we can add a text field in this vertical box on top of our horizontal box. Let's use the center alignment for this one. And what I've also done is imported a font. In the assets I have a font, so you can Google any font you like that's free, of course, import it into your project, and then you will be able to access it in this fonts family. So I will select my font, I will change the color to be the same as for the slots borders, and let's call this player slots. There we go. So now if we press play on this, now this will look something like this. I believe the padding is not good enough, so I will play with these values until I find a padding that I like. There we go. So it's a little closer to what we desire. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing like we did with the player slots, but I'm going to replicate this thing in my UI item data. So again, right click, wrap it with a border. Now let's change the border's tint to be our color. There we go. Let's see, so we had a padding of 3 in the top one. Now for the bottom one, it actually doesn't matter about the color that we give to it. What matters is that in the graph on our brush binding, we do the same thing that we did in our player slots. So let me real quick simply copy all of this to over here, delete this, paste this in, and basically it's the same thing we had in the previous one. So now if we would go back to our inventory panel, now on the top, what I want to do is, so I have a few elements. I have a border, I have a vertical box, inside of it we have a scroll box and a text at the bottom. I want to add another text on top of my scroll box, and this will be again justification aligned to the middle. The text will be let's call this backpack. Let's give this a font that we desire it to have, and let's change the color and opacity. There we go. So we have that set up. And also one more thing that I want to do is I don't want to display our backpack if we don't have one. So let's change this functionality up a little bit in our UI inventory. Let's look for a place where we spawn it. That's right here. So what I want to do over here, let's see, do we cast to our character? No, we do not cast over here to our character. So let's do so. Let's cast to the third person character. Let's get the owning player pawn, and let's get our equipped backpack. And what we want to do over here is check if this thing right here is valid. So is valid with a question mark, so it has an execution. Let's do this. If it is valid, we want to go directly to create our inventory panel. If it's not valid, then we shall skip this, also skip the add child, and go directly to our UI Dropbox. So now if we press play, press I, we have no backpack location, but if we pick up a backpack, now you can see that we have our backpack in here. One more thing that we can change the color of is this scroll bar right here. So in our inventory panel, if we go to the designer, select our scroll box, we can change the styling. So once we've selected our scroll box, we want to go to the style, bar style, and we want to change the normal thumb image. So I will just simply change the tint. You can of course use an image or whatever you desire, and I'm going to use the hovered. I'm going to have the same color. You might have a different color, and I also will have the dragged in the same color. So now that should be good. Let me also change the text of this. This is later going to be our maximum weight limit text, but as of right now we're going to leave it be. Now you can see that our scroll bar thingy is also looking pretty nice. So now I'm going to do pretty much exactly the same thing with my equipment panel. I'm going to leave this part out because I think I've already explained plenty enough of details. Just in case if some of you don't know really much about the widgets, let me know in the comment section down below, and I will make a in-depth video about how you should approach creating widgets and just simply talk about widgets in general. So just for the example, I'm going to show you what I actually did. Basically, I selected a slot. I aligned them the way I want them to be. I selected one of the slots, so I right clicked it and I wrapped it with a vertical box. What it did was cause a small issue. Basically it changed up the equipped slot settings. It set it all to be fill. So if we would now add a text at the bottom of it, you can see that it does stretch out our icon. So what I did was selected the icon again and just simply set this to align in the middle and set it to fill. So now to simply change the sizing of the text for all of our texts, what I will do is select one text, hold Control, and select all the texts that I want to change the size of, like so, and then I can change the sizing for all of them at the same time. So let's see, like 18 or maybe 16 should be good. So now let's try this out. Let's get ourselves a backpack, press I, there we go. So we have a primary, secondary, back slot, and so forth for all of our slots. One thing though that I didn't quite like is the total background. I want to make it darker, so I will select my Dropbox, which is filled out across the entire screen, and change its tint. Well, I will change the opacity to, let's say, like 0.5. So now this should look a little darker. There we go. So the last thing left for us to do is work on our crafting panel, and we want it to be displayed on kind of a separate window so that we have a button for the inventory and for the crafting. And what you might notice is that I've actually simply just duplicated one of the weapons. So this is what it would look like if we would have many craftables. We would be able to scroll it sideways, but I will create a grid panel for this. So first things first, let's go to our UI inventory panel. Now inside of our inventory panel, what we want to do is we want to look for a thing called widget switcher. So let's drag this in and let's make sure that this is aligned to the whole screen. And this thing basically will allow us to switch between widgets just like you would in a browser, or over here simply switch between the tabs but without the actual tabs. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to look for a canvas panel, and let's drag this on top of our inside of our widget switcher. Let's select all of the content that we have and let's drag this in our canvas panel. Now the next thing that we want to do is drag in another canvas panel. So now we're gonna have two canvas panels, and once we select one of these, the other one is getting destroyed. What I want to do now is actually remove my craftable list. So let's simply move this to the other canvas panel like so. So now this is gone from over here. So that we can know which is which, let's call this inventory and let's call this crafting so that we know which is which. And now in our inventory panel, let's add a horizontal box. Let's make sure that that is below our box panel so that we can actually click on this. I will anchor this to the middle. And now since I need a background for this, I will actually wrap this with a border, and let's give this border a tint. So this was black and 0.3 if I'm not mistaken. Oh, actually not the content one, but the tint one. So there we go, so 0.3. Now inside of here, let's add two buttons. So button number 1 in the horizontal box and the button number 2. Let's make sure this is set to fill, and actually we need just one. We can duplicate the other one in a second. Now let's change the background color of our button to be the color of the frame. Then inside of this button I want to add a border. Let's add a border. Let's make sure this is set to be filled. Let's give this some padding, so it was 3 in the other ones. Let's give this a tint, a black tint. Let's add a text field to this. And again, changing the font, changing the color of it. Let's make this a little bigger perhaps. So perhaps like 40, 50. And this is going to be the inventory. Let's make sure this is set to be in the middle. There we go. Now let's select our button and let's rename the button to be the inventory button. Make sure this is a variable, and then we can duplicate this button and let's rename this to be the crafting button. Now we can select our text that's inside of our border and let's call this crafting. There we go. And I might add a spacer in between these two buttons, a little bit on the x-axis. Let's say like 4 pixels should be good enough. Now let's have a look. So this is how it's gonna look. So now let's set up the functionality. Let's go to our graph and let's see. So what we want to do is select our inventory button, do a on-click event, and same goes for our crafting button, also on-click event. We want to drag in our widget switcher, and we want to set active widget index to this one, and we want to have another one over here, same target. And so let's see, this is the inventory, this is the index 0, and this is going to be the index 1. How we can find out which indexes those are is by going back to the designer. Let's select our widget switcher, and here we have this active widget index. So right now we are on 0, and if we type in 1, we can see the other window. Now let's make sure that we can actually switch back as well. So what I will do is copy our border with our buttons. So I'm gonna click Ctrl C, select the panel, Ctrl V, there we go. Let me set minus 200, 150. So minus 250, 150, there we go. And now this basically duplicated this, but it created new buttons. So we have a inventory button 1. So again, on click, crafting button 1 on click. Let's move these in here, and all we gotta do is simply connect the pins because we want them to do exactly the same thing. Now back in our designer, now we want to display our craftables. So to ensure the styling is the same, I will select the scroll box from the inventory panel and copy its bar style over to our craftables list scroll bar. There we go. And inside of this scroll bar, I want to add a uniform grid panel, like so. And let's make this into the left top corner, and let's set the same padding values we have in our inventory panel. So 10 and 96, 96. So 10, 96, 96. There we go. Let's rename this to be our grid panel craftables. Let's make this into a variable. Let's go to our graph and let's see. So previously we are simply adding things to our craftable list, and actually our scroll bar scroll orientation option needs to be changed from horizontal to vertical now, because I want to be able to scroll up and down instead of left to right like we were previously. So that means that in our graph we can simply remove these last two nodes. These are not going to be usable as of right now, but instead we want to bring in our grid panel craftables, and we want to add a child to uniform grid, like so. Connect the content, and now we already have set up the math that's required for us to have the row and the columns, and we have that in our inventory panel. So to make this a little quicker so we can end this soon, I'm gonna copy these nodes, and I'm actually gonna copy these two as well. So let's bring these in over here, because we also want to set our horizontal and vertical alignments to be set to fill, so that they would fill out the space they have. Now also let's connect our column and let's connect our row, and now we need this slots per row variable, which is not existing in this UI inventory widget. So let's promote this to a variable. Let's set our slots per row, let's say 11. Let's hope it works. Maybe we need more or less depending on the size that we have, and we now need this value right here. And how do we achieve this is by adding a new variable, and let's call this craftable index. And at the end of the function, once we have already added a craftable to the list, then we want to set this variable again. And actually we can get this, and we can do a plus plus, which gives us the increment int macro, which automatically adds 1. So that's basically the current value plus 1. There we go. And then we can plug this inside of here. There we go. So we can compile and save this, and now we should have a grid panel. Press I. There we go, we have ourselves a grid panel. So also we are opening the crafting panel straight away. So in the designer, let's select our widget switcher and let's set this active to be 0 instead of 1. So we would go to the inventory first. Now let's go to our UI craftable, and previously, just like with the slots, let's wrap this with a border. Let's make sure our border has the correct color. So I'm gonna copy it from over here so they all have the same color. Set the tint. There we go. Padding of 3 units. And hopefully this should work just fine. So press I, there we go, crafting, and we have our craftables. And one last thing, in our inventory panel we have our Dropbox in the background, but in our crafting we don't have one. So what I want to do is simply add a border over here at the very top, so it's in the background. I want to make sure that it fills the entire screen, and we want to set the tint of this to be black, and it was 0.5, I believe. There we go. So we can compile and save this. And what I noticed just now is that we have in our inventory we have a small border, which we do not have in our craftings. So if we would go to our UI inventory, select the Dropbox panel, let's change this padding to be 0. So now it should stretch out all the way. Press I. There we go. No longer having that thing over there. So that's gonna be it for today's video. Actually, it went a little longer than I expected, but we have changed our visuals. Hope this gives you a clue on what you can do to make this look the way you want it to. So if you have any questions or issues or whatsoever, make sure you leave a comment down below, or better yet, join my Discord channel where you can access me more frequently and more faster. And yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video. Leave a like, subscribe, and I see you guys in the next video.